context of white supremacy, Gus T Renegade, and justice, and to share constructive information on what racism, white supremacy is and how it works. Again, I want to remind folks, I hope the information we provide is constructive and of some value to you. If you are a non-white person, if you do not find the information helpful, please invest your time and energy in something else. If it's a different program or something else, I do not want non-white people wasting time if they don't feel that this program is of constructive value. So always want to make sure I'm saying that. Want to hop right into the program. Before I do, remind folks, please support Back of the Bus's blog, nonwhitealliance.wordpress.com. Again, nonwhitealliance.wordpress.com, and support Cree's blog as well, Counter-Racist Evolving Engineer, her blog, cree7.wordpress.com. Again, cree7.wordpress.com. Our guest for today's program, I'm going to begin reading a little chunk from her blog, and she can explain later why I thought this would be an appropriate way to start things off. I think whites do the things they do to blacks because whites want to be better than blacks, and most whites want to be better than all colored people. Whites think they are the king and queen of the world. I think whites and blacks should have the same rights. I'm just interjecting, not privileges, rights, and should be able to do the same things. Whites treat other colored people like they are animals. I think it should be stopped right now. That's from her blog. She can share where that came from and why that's significant, and if she thinks that is an accurate assessment of what's happening here on the planet under the system of white supremacy. Our guest, she operates the blog, Why Am I Not Surprised? It's linked in the chat room. You can just click her name, and it'll take you right to her blog. Again, Why Am I Not Surprised.blogspot.com. She's also written a book. She has portions of her book available at her blog, Reduced to Equality, My Odyssey to Renounce Racial Privilege, and Find Myself. As I said, portions of it are on the blog. You can check that out when you go to the blog. Again, Why Am I Not Surprised? She writes all about racism, white supremacy, and suggestions for things white people can do and non-white people can do to get this problem solved as soon as possible. Hopefully she'll have some constructive information. She said she was excited to come chat with us, have a good time, and hopefully have a constructive program. Cool, she could share some of her Saturday. Our guest for today's program, Changeseeker. Are you there?
I am.
Outstanding. Thank you so much for taking some of your Saturday afternoon to speak with us.
Thank you for the invitation to be a part of this. I'm really excited because this is very, very important to the world today and very important to me, both as an individual and as an individual with all the different categories that I belong to.
I guess if you could give like a short summary, just kind of who you are. We'll get more in depth as we go in the program, but just kind of to start listeners off if they haven't checked your blog out or anything.
Okay. I am, first of all, as you point out, I'm a blogger, and that's the tail end of a lot of other things that I've been involved with. I was raised as a white person. I say that because I think that a lot of white people, quote unquote, since that's a political category in my definition book, many of us don't know what our background really is, what our heritage really is. But if we are raised as a white person, then that brings with it certain realities, and I was. However, at a relatively early age, I would guess somewhere in my early teens, maybe 12 or 13, I began demonstrating that I just didn't get the logic of it. And so that affected the rest of my life in various ways. I was in the prison movement in the 1970s, and I learned a lot of things that were going on at that time that gave me to understand that there was some legal background that most people weren't looking at that had to do with the socially constructed political notion of race. And then later on, I had a biracial child who, as a matter of fact, if I can interject it at this point, wrote what you just read. And that was very exciting. It was interesting to hear it read from outside myself and to realize how it sounds, because she was only about 7 or so when she wrote that, and I had no idea she was going to, that was in there. You know, I wasn't surprised, but I hadn't heard her articulate that in that way, and she wrote it, complete with, you know, mistakes and everything, and she had already understood the situation very clearly, I think. And I think, unfortunately, that although that was written 20 years ago, it's still true. And I find that, frankly, horrifying. So the result of that is that I have dedicated my life in various ways to coming against white supremacy every day in as many ways as possible. I teach in a university. I write my blog. I write other things. I speak. And I work one-on-one with students, both black and white, in the interest of making this a different world, not just one at a time, because I don't think that's enough, but really attacking the social institutions that keep us in the state we're in. So that's basically who I am.
Wow. Wow. Okay. Wow. Looking forward to a great program. Should be very constructive. When I get to some of your blog posts, I had an enjoyable few days reading the blog. I was able to read all of the posts you shared. Not all the blog posts, but I was able to read all of the posts where you shared portions from Reduced to Equality. So we should be able to chat about that and other of your posts as well. My co-host, she is a little bit older than your daughter was when she wrote that statement that I read. She just turned 11. She is a non-white female, and she is also interested in replacing white supremacy with justice ASAP. Justice, if you are there and you have some questions you would like to ask Changeseeker, go right ahead.
Are you a racist?
Am I racist? Is that what it was?
Yes.
I'm just clarifying. Okay. I do believe that white people are embedded with an infection that manifests itself as racism. I don't consider myself a racist in the same way that I don't consider myself my disease of diabetes. But I have it because it was embedded in me. So therefore, I have to work every day to come against that. The same way I have to manage my disease of diabetes, I have to manage this thing that they put in me that will never go away.
Excuse me, I don't understand what you're talking about.
Okay. Is there a particular part of it you didn't understand, or something, or just in general?
All of what you said I do not understand.
Okay. All right. Let's do this then. I believe that white people who are raised as white people in the United States, have a form of insanity. Does that make sense? And that form of insanity I would call racism. So in that sense, we have it. Now, if you participate, if you let that run in you, if you let that take you over, if you act insane, if you act racist, if you think racist, and you don't try to do anything about it, then you're a racist. And I think most white people do act that way, even if they don't realize it. But I work very, very, very hard not to come out of that space. Still, it's in there, just like the spaghetti sauce. Is that better?
Why do you think you are not a racist?
No, I didn't say I was not one. I said I work very hard to keep whatever this is that it's like an infection, it's like a disease, a form of insanity that you can't do anything about, but you have to work on real hard to make sure that it doesn't hurt people, to make sure it doesn't hurt yourself. I work very hard at it, so that's a good thing. And any white person could do this. Most of them don't, but any one of them could. That's one of the reasons I try so hard to tell the truth, so that white people will get the idea, and also so that people of color, black people, will also understand that it's not their problem, it's a white people problem.
That's all for now.
Thank you, Justice.
Again, context of white supremacy, Justice, Gus T Renegade, and our guest for today, Changeseeker. I want to make sure we don't have confusion, because when Justice was asking her question, I wasn't sure if it was answered.
Okay.
And I pay attention. Dr. Kevorkian would be proud of paying attention to metaphors. When you use the metaphor of having diabetes, unless I'm incorrect, if someone is suffering from the affliction of diabetes, then they would be a diabetic. They would say, I'm suffering from diabetes, but I am a diabetic.
Good point. Good point. Sure. Okay. Let me think of how to. You're absolutely correct. I am a diabetic. If you use those terminologies, you're right. And I'm trying to think. See, the reason I hesitate is not because I'm trying to be slick. The reason I hesitate is because I try to be very careful that what comes out my mouth is the truth. Because it's real easy to just roll with whatever you've been taught, particularly about oppression, whether it has to do with male-female relations, or whether it has to do with black-white relations, or whether it has to do with rich-poor relations. It's real easy to take the easier way and to just say the flip answers. And I don't let myself do that, because I think that's a cop-out. At the same time, that it doesn't just mean that I can't say I'm not a racist, but what it also means is that I can't flippantly say, yes, I'm a racist, because that's the easy way out. I'm responsible for myself. I manage my diseases, whatever they are. And I think racism is a disease. So if we use the euphemism, the metaphor, if we use the metaphor that a diabetic, that diabetes makes you a diabetic, then in that sense, racism, because that's what people that are raised white are infected with at a very early age, would make me a racist. Yeah. In that sense. Now, what I do with it and how I handle that, how I manage it, that's also true. So I'll go with that. I do tell my students that it's like Prego. It's in there. You can't just get rid of it by being a good-hearted person, or even by doing what I do, which is work very hard against it. It's in there. It's in there. I hate it.
Me too. I do think very important to point that out, because I think one of the big problems for non-white people and our confusion around racism, white supremacy, and how it works is that we tend to really struggle with being able to identify who exactly is causing the problem of white supremacy. And I think it's very important when you can start to put faces on the problem. And it seems from what you said, your answer would suggest that if you are a white person in the system of white supremacy, you will have the virus of racism, white supremacy. You will practice racism, white supremacy. Your answer suggested that to me. If that's not accurate, if I'm not misconstruing what you stated, please correct me. But I think it's very important that non-white people understand that the system of white supremacy is white people. If that's accurate, is that an accurate statement?
I believe it is, and I do spend a fair amount of time, even one-on-one, with people of color, telling them that it's not them, and that it is a white system that is created, was set up originally. The social institutions in this country were set up by white people. They are run by white people. They're maintained by white people, and therefore, if there's a problem in this society, it is the result of white people's decision-making and functioning. And therefore, we have to take responsibility for doing everything we can about it. And in that sense, yes, I think that's absolutely true. And I certainly tell white people the same thing, because if white people don't take responsibility for this, I saw a quote recently that said, we're going to wind up where we're headed. And that concerns me deeply. I think if we don't identify what's going on very clearly, nobody wins.
I agree. And I think it's incredibly important, again, putting a face on the problem so that the non-white people, victims of white supremacy, understand the system is white people, the everyday white people you see every day. If you are white, you are going to be trained to function and uphold the global system of white supremacy. I wanted to ask, I guess, my definition so we'll have clarity around terms. The definition I use for both racism and white supremacy, and I feel those two terms are equal. The definition that I use is as follows: a global system of people who classify themselves as white and are dedicated to abusing and or subjugating everyone in the known universe whom they classify as not white. Do you feel that such a system exists, and do you think that definition is accurate?
I think that's a wonderful definition, Gus. Really, really wonderful definition. Yes, I think it exists. When I said that I'm dedicated to doing something about it, that's why, because I think it exists. And I don't think it exists because I have some sort of a guilt streak, or because I don't like myself. Some people say you hate your race, you hate your people. They come up with these statements about how they see me, and I tell them that I don't hate anybody. I'm just trying to keep us from self-destructing because of exactly the definition you use. I'd love to have that written down, as a matter of fact, but in any case, one of the things that I say about racism that I think a lot of people are confused about is they'll say, well, black people are racist too. And the definition I use for racism is prejudice plus power, which kind of fits in with what you were talking about in terms of white supremacy. And by the way, I call white supremacy the default position in the United States. Not just in the South, but the default position, period, in the whole country. And of course, as you point out, this is not peculiar to the United States, and particularly in that the United States is so incredibly racist. The whole rest of the world has sort of helped to create the United States and then participated with the United States. When I say the whole rest of the world, I mean people who have been raised as white people. And I agree with you that it's a category, it's a creation, it's a social construction that was created for the purpose of subjugating and abusing people and using skin tone, of all things, as the excuse, which makes about as much sense as using whether or not your second toe is longer than your first toe, it's not logical, but that's what's happened. And now that it's happened, this stranglehold on the power has occurred, and people make excuses for why it's logical. It's not logical. And while black people, people of color, may in fact be prejudiced against white people, which would certainly be understandable under the circumstances, or may be hostile, or may be angry, or may even be violent and dangerous, I don't say they can be racist, because for racism, using my definition, you have to have prejudice plus power, the power to affect other people's lives, not just on an individual basis, but on a social or institutional basis, and that's the position white people are in. Only white people.
I definitely appreciate that, and we got that early in the program, that non-white people cannot be racist. I think that's very important. That it pops up frequently, especially when I talk to non-white people. And I think that, in my view, when I hear non-white people say that, well, black people are racist too, that to me evidences our confusion about what's happening on the planet here. So I'm appreciative to get that early. Your blog, Why Am I Not Surprised? I wanted you, I guess, to share how that got started, the title, but also I want to toss this in because I was reading your blog and you were talking about when you were in college and you were working on a project where you were comparing perceptions that use the term African Americans had about Africans and vice versa, and you spoke with two white colleagues at the college, and you were surprised about their responses. I guess if you could share a little bit about that, and then if you can tie that to the blog, why it has that title, and just what your purpose is with the blog.
Good, yeah. I backed into this my master's thesis project because I had been what I call bicultural for a long time. I had gone back and forth across the color line, had a lot of friends that were black, and had been taught a lot by black people. And by that time, I had my biracial daughter, and so I'm in school and I'm studying. I had started studying race primarily because I wanted to affect change. I never was an academic. I didn't go to college till I was 38 years old. I had been on welfare for 5 years before I even went to college. So by the time I got to school, I was not trying to do it to teach. I was not trying to do it to be a scholar. I was just trying to get a job good enough to support 2 kids. But as I brought everything that I had been doing and being to this experience of college, and began hanging out with international students, a lot of whom were Africans, I began hearing them refer to African Americans as arrogant, and hear African Americans refer to the Africans as arrogant, and I thought that was very interesting. What I eventually learned was that the white-controlled mass media, including movies and papers and everything, actually controls the information African Americans get about Africa and Africans, and controls the information that Africans get about African Americans. And so they don't even communicate with each other sometimes. Now, that's increasing now. But at the time I was doing this 20 years ago, it wasn't happening a lot, and so they really didn't know each other. And I was doing this piece of work to learn about that, and the reason I wanted to talk to a couple of white men was that I wanted to use them as a base to suggest that this is how white people think. And they were both sociologists. They were both just finishing their degrees. They both knew who I was, so they both knew that I was likely to be pretty anti-racist, anti-racist. And so I thought they would say the least possible racist things. And, of course, what I discovered was that the first one said black people on this campus really they're all on welfare, and they really don't want to work, and they really don't want degrees, so I think they should leave and let people who want the degrees, I guess he meant white people, have them, which I found pretty bizarre because most of the students on the campus who were black students were very wealthy students from Chicago who looked wealthy and carried themselves in a wealthy way, and he wasn't. So I don't know where that was coming from. But to make it worse, I got with the second guy, started interviewing him, and before I could even ask a few questions, he had announced that he thought that you could take the black person out of the jungle, and that's not the word he used, but you can't take the jungle out of the black person, and I was just flabbergasted. I had to really work at pretending to be a social scientist who was not affected by this. I just kept my face blank, wrote it down, nodded up and down, and said, I see. But I was absolutely dumbstruck. And, you know, it's funny you should zero in on that, because I suspect that that might have been a turning point for me. To have it in my face in that way, at that point in my development, probably created a, what are you going to do about this, a challenge for me. And when I started writing the blog 4.5 years ago, I was saying in class sometimes, why am I not surprised? Every time I would see some horrified racist thing, I would say, why am I not surprised? So when I started writing the blog, it just seemed like a no-brainer that it would be, why am I not surprised? And I'm still reeling, not only by what that guy said, but by the way that white people participate in the white supremacist system and pretend to be asleep. You cannot wake up a person who's pretending to be asleep. And most white people stay in that condition, I think, so they don't have to change anything, so they can pretend they don't know. When they do, if they didn't know, they wouldn't pretend to be asleep.
How do white people pretend to be asleep with regards to racism? How do they pretend to not be aware of the system of white supremacy?
Well, one thing is they have learned, they were taught as they were being taught how to be white. And I'm getting ready, I'm sort of mulling over a blog post I want to do about putting on your white suit. I think there is a white suit that white people wear. You put it on just like you put on any other social role, you know, and so I want to think about that and do some writing about it. But I think that one of the ways they pretend to be asleep is that they've been taught these one-liners. Don't call me a racist, but is one of them. Some of my best friends, I swear to God, if I ever hear another white person say some of my best friends are black, I will vomit. I don't understand how they don't get how horrifying that is. And this is pretending to be asleep. This is a good example. I had a student not too long ago raise her hand in class and say, I'm afraid that some people will see this as racist. And I hope not, because I don't want to be seen that way. Now understand, this is a class with 90 people in it, about half of whom are black, and she's white. She says, I don't want to be seen that way. But some of my best friends are black. Now, pretending to be asleep looks like she prefaced it by saying some people are going to think this is racist. She knows. But she chooses to pretend that she doesn't know. She follows it up by saying, but some of my best friends are black.
Wow. I guess I want to make sure that the non-white listeners and myself are clearly understanding how that is demonstrating you are pretending to be ignorant about racism, particularly with the second part of the statement. When a white person says, and I've heard that a lot too, when a white person says, hey, you know, I've got tons of non-white friends, or some of my best friends are black. What are they trying to suggest by that statement? What is the effect that they want that statement to have?
I think they want that statement to serve as camouflage, protective coloration, if you will. You know, an attempt to cover up what they know exists. It would be the same. Here's another example. It would be the same as putting on a lot of perfume because you know you smell bad. If you don't know you smell bad, you're not going to put on a lot of perfume because you don't know you smell bad. That would be the effect of actually being asleep, okay? I mean, a person who is really asleep, you can wake them up, you shake them, and they go, and they rouse, you know, they say, oh, yeah, you know. But if somebody is pretending to be asleep and you shake them, they keep their eyes closed. They're not really asleep, but they're afraid to open their eyes. They don't want to be perceived as being awake. So they put on all that perfume to make sure that they don't smell bad.
Wow. Might have to use that one for the non-white people. I have met a lot of non-white people who feel like what we need to do is to educate white people about racism, and I think I'll be using that from now on. You cannot educate someone about racism who is pretending to be ignorant about racism. And most likely is a lot more informed than you are about racism. I would add that as the caveat, but yeah, and I think that's true. I think that's true. White people are a lot more informed about racism and white supremacy than non-white people. Even if they don't use the most accurate terms, their understanding, their thinking, and their conduct, I think, demonstrates that they are way more informed than non-white people. Justice. If you have some questions you would like to ask Changeseeker, please go right ahead.
Hello?
Make sure. Justice, are you with us? Her mic is open and everything.
Hello?
Okay, we got you. Go right ahead. If you have some questions, we can hear you now.
Do you think your... Hello?
Hello?
Do you think your daughter... Do you think your non-white daughter is correct about the information that you typed when she thinks what is wrong in this world?
Yes, I do. I do think she was right. I think she was right when she wrote it, and I think it's still true today, actually. I do. I was glad to know that she did know that she saw it already when she was so young. I was hopeful that it would help her to protect herself from white supremacy.
Okay, I'll be off for now.
Thanks, Justice.
Let's see. I'm going to, our switchboard, I guess the program might be constructive. Quite a few folks have called already. I will go to the switchboard at the bottom of the hour, so hang tight. Me and Justice have a few more, then I'll check the switchboard. When I was reading your blog, very interesting, and again, it's linked in the chat room if you're listening at Blog Talk Radio. All you have to do is click Why Am I Not Surprised? And it will take you to her blog. You can check out her posts and read some of the things that we're speaking about on the program. If you're not listening at Blog Talk Radio, I can give it to you. Why Am I Not Surprised? All one word, .blogspot.com. So you can go check it out. Changeseeker. From your blog, and as I said, I was reading your book that I guess is not published yet, but should be soon, hopefully, Reduced to Equality, My Odyssey to Renounce Racial Privilege and Find Myself. You talk a lot about your non-white daughter, Morgan, and experiences that you all had and difficulties that your parents had with you being in a sexual relationship with a black person, and particularly your mom. I guess I would start by asking, you said that if you're a white person, you're going to be a racist. That is the system of white supremacy. Do you think there's anything incorrect about a racist being in a sexual relationship with a non-white person?
I think that there is well, let me start by saying this. In a perfect world, which of course we're not discussing a perfect world, but I want to start by saying that in a perfect world, all relationships would be between two people who had great respect and admiration for each other, and came to the relationship as whole human beings. And we could probably spend 2 hours talking about what a whole human being is. But I think most of us are walking wounded in one way or another. But in a perfect world, that's the way it would be. And it wouldn't matter what you looked like. But we're not in a perfect world. And because of that, I think we bring a lot of baggage, not only personal baggage, but social baggage to every relationship. Even if we're just buying something at Walgreens and we're at the cash register and whoever's behind the cash register, if, whoever they are, we're going to have some sort of a brief relationship with them. And that relationship is going to be affected by all kinds of things, including race and class and gender and all kinds of other stuff, preferences and personal and social issues. So I think we bring that with us, and it can make things very, very complicated. So therefore, I think that it would be rational to say that sometimes it's a good thing not to add more baggage, In that case, it would be a good thing for African Americans to be with African Americans, or I don't know what to say about white people exactly. But certainly for people to stay in certain categories. But if you use that kind of thinking, then you fall into this trap or not a trap exactly, but you open up a door that I think has been open for many women, since this is a patriarchal society as well, where women say, I don't think I can be a whole human being in an intimate relationship with a man. And I would argue that they could be right. For them, that could be absolutely rational, reasonable. And in which case, in order for them to be a whole human being, they have to do whatever it is they have to do to make it possible for themselves to get through the night, because I think that's what most of us are trying to do. But we cross lines for a whole range of reasons. And I think when those lines are racial, then it becomes a political act. And this is another one of the things that I want to do a post on soon. I don't know when it'll be exactly, but I want to talk about the politics of crossing the race line in terms of intimate relationships. Because I know that there are people who pretend to be asleep about that as well. There are people who say, well, you just can't help who you love. Well, you can too. We do it all the time. We make decisions on who we're going to be with in 1,000 different ways. And in order to be a whole human being, what I had to do myself, and keep in mind, the only parts of my book that I have posted so far, I've been posting them in order, so it's only gone up through about the first third. So there's a lot of stuff that happens in the back 2/3 of the book that comes after the part that's been posted so far. But one of the things that I ultimately did that I don't talk about in the book, but I spent 10 years by myself. And I spent 10 years by myself so that I could become a whole human being, or at least move in that direction. I needed to do that for me. without having somebody else I'm trying to create intimacy with, because I didn't feel prepared to do that. Now, most people are not willing to even think about something like that, and if you had told me in advance that I was going to do that, I don't think I would have been willing either. But over time, it just unfolded, and I think it's what was appropriate for me. In the context of a relationship that I would be in with a person of color today, especially if that person was a man, I would be very, very involved in the process of understanding that for me the personal is political. And it would behoove me and that person to work on a daily basis at being very, very honest with ourselves about what we were doing, why we were doing it, how we were doing it, uncovering the little masked racisms, the little masked sexisms, the little masked roles and games that people play routinely, because we have been taught to do that. We've been socialized to do these things to our detriment on both sides. It's not just one side, and it would have to take a lot more work than most people would be willing to put in. Now, is it possible? I believe it is. Is it common? No. No, it's not. And therefore, I could see the argument that it would be better not to cross the color line in terms of intimacy. I can see, however, that given the right circumstance and the right people who were vigilant, really vigilant, it would be doable. But again, in that case, it becomes a political act and not just somehow putting together a love relationship or something like that.
Very interesting. I'm not sure I heard whether or not you feel there's anything incorrect about it, but I did find the response very interesting. I guess I would say for myself, being a classified as a black male, a victim of white supremacy, I don't think it would be possible to be a quote-unquote whole person as long as the system of white supremacy exists. I think that would have to be replaced with justice in order for me to be a whole person. And I suspect that would be true for everybody, but I could be incorrect. I think in terms of it being a political act, as long as we're in the system of white supremacy, I think that would be the most dominant force in any sort of people activity. Even if this is if we're talking about a sexual relationship between a white person and a non-white person, I still think that the most dominant force would still be racism, white supremacy, that virus. That white person would still have that virus. And I think the non-white person would still be feeling a lot of the effects from racism, white supremacy. And in fact, you talk about that in your blog a lot. I guess I can pull in one of those to add to the discussion.
Okay.
If you could share, particularly the situation that happened with Ray, and I believe that's your daughter Morgan's father. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. That you and Ray worked in the same facility, and it seems racism, white supremacy cropped up there. Could you share with us what happened in that situation?
Right. Well, I was put in a position where, because I was the supervisor of the program, I was told that because I was pregnant, I had to fire him. They called it laying off, but it was, it's firing. And we're talking about 30 years ago. I'm not copping out. I accept responsibility. If I wasn't accepting a responsibility, I wouldn't have written the book, or I wouldn't have discussed it in the book. But I say in the book that if I had it to do over again, I would have told my boss that he had to do it, that I wasn't willing to do it, that I thought it was wrong, because it was wrong. I did tell him I didn't think there was a problem, but he said, well, you fire him or I will. I should have said, fine, you do it. If that's what you want to do, then you do it. I don't think it's right. I didn't do that. So in that case, I failed to take the stand that would have been appropriate. And it would have been appropriate on so many different levels for so many different reasons. But certainly the most important of those reasons was that this was a racist act. And it was by a man of color, by the way. My boss was a man of color. But he had the perception, and this came out of the sexist mindset, I think. He had the mindset that my employees that I was supervising would not respect me if they understood that I had been impregnated by one of the people that was working for me. And I knew that wasn't true. It had nothing to do with it. But I let him, roll over me. I let my boss tell me what to do. And that's the way sexism works. I've been teaching gender and sexuality courses for the last couple of years. And I have learned a lot. And one of the things that I've been caused to realize is that while the white supremacy has been in position for about 500 years, patriarchy has been in position for maybe about 7,000. So we've really lost any sense that how this is not natural also. We've just totally lost that. And I let this man bulldoze me into doing something that was wrong, and I think it was important in shifting our relationship, Ray's and my relationship. I think it was a difficult thing after that, and I didn't notice it at the time, and I can't even, in looking back at it 30 years ago, I can't see, or 28 years ago, 27 years ago, I can't see where the exact examples of it were, but I know it did. I know it made a difference, and I can't imagine it not making a difference. I just was oblivious at the time, and I was oblivious, and you could attribute that to racism. I was also oblivious because I was a lot younger and a lot more self-centered. I mean, honestly speaking.
I wanted to make sure the listeners got what took place. Changeseeker and her male partner at the time, father of her non-white child,
Should I be able to hear you, Gus?
I believe you can hear me now. Is that correct?
I can.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, I was just saying I looked at the blog post where you described this. I wanted to make sure listeners really got what took place. Changeseeker and her partner, the father of her non-white daughter, they were working at the same facility, and her boss, who's a non-white male, told her that her partner, he didn't approve of their situation, and her partner had to be fired, laid off. And that either Changeseeker was going to have to fire him, or he would fire him, the boss would fire him. And Changeseeker fired her non-white partner. And she wrote on her blog, she said that, in retrospect, I realized that I emasculated Ray by firing him, something that would not be easy for him to come to grips with, while I was going to work every day and he was receiving unemployment benefits. I thought that was just really incredible story. And I continued reading, and you said one of the lines that just struck me, because I think it came after this story, and you said, what if it hadn't taken Ray so long to overcome his discomfort with my race? And I thought that was fascinating, particularly when you said race. I thought it would be more accurate to say, what if it hadn't taken Ray so long to overcome his discomfort with my racism? Or what if it hadn't taken Ray so long to overcome his... Well, actually, I think that would be most accurate, either racism or my white supremacy. I think that would be most accurate, and I think then we have a whole different discussion about what it means that he was not able to overcome his discomfort in this political act of having sex with a white person. Do you have thoughts about that? And do you think it would be accurate to replace race with either racism or white supremacy in your sentence?
In the context of our dialogue, it seems that that would be the case, but what I was referring to there was something that he had discussed, and it's earlier in that section or that chapter, whatever it is. I think I had talked about it a little bit. He wasn't particularly partial to white people, and we had a number of conversations, not a lot of them, and not in depth a whole lot, because he was struggling with that himself. But he had, and I'm sure it was a response to white supremacy, but it was manifested in how he saw and experienced white people in specific, even in individuals, and it affected the way he felt about me. You have to understand that we didn't, waylay each other. We were working together, and it was not to be cute, but it was just one of those things. We really did become involved. It wasn't just we had sex. We really did become involved, and we had a lot of conversations, and he was the first one that helped me to understand a lot of the things that I now understand as well as I do. He was the first one, for example, who asked me, do you know what garrison forces are? And things like that. And I realized now that these were reflections of some of his learning that he had done, some of his following through on understanding how white supremacy worked, and he was putting me on the track of a better understanding. We did maintain one degree or other of relationship for some years after that point, even though we did not keep living together and did not ultimately marry, though that did come up. The point being that if I was going to say, coming to grips with my white supremacy or my racism or whatever, this series of acts or whatever, we would have been including that incident in a way that I didn't include it in that paragraph. You're correct. It would add a new, a serious nuance, a serious new aspect that I really didn't address in that paragraph. But all I was referring to was that, because that wasn't the only line in that paragraph, I talk about several different aspects of how race affected that situation, how my mother felt about him, how he felt about my mother, how he felt about me in terms of my race, how race affected, all these different aspects. I don't remember what they all are, but how they were all, how the relationship was affected by all these different aspects of race. And I try to keep coming back to that theme in the book, is that once we set up this white supremacy system, whatever you want to call it, once we set that up, it twists and turns and affects everything, not just as a big blanket that's on top of everything, but in all kinds of little nitpicking, detailed ways that then have to be, they become knotted like a wad of string or something. And the whole process of trying to unknot it, trying to somehow follow one of the strings all the way through, is just, it's a lifetime of work. It's a lifetime of work. So, yes, you're right. My white supremacy had put him in a position where he had to, or let's put it this way, my participation in the white supremacist act that robbed him of his job, that created yet another thing for him to deal with. But even before that happened, his feelings about me as a white person were affecting us so strongly that I don't know what might have happened regardless. And that was real too. And that's also because of white supremacy. But that was driven by his, how he saw me, because he was very pointed about it. He never, ever expected to father a biracial child. He did not expect that. When I got pregnant, he was really happy about it for whatever reason. But he was clear about the fact that he had said even a few months before that he would certainly never do that, and then he did. Like I say, it's complicated. Not just for us. It's complicated, period. For candid.
It sounds like I would pick a different C word. I would say confusion. It sounds like exactly, and things that are complicated are confusing. So
they are. They are.
It's
which is exactly why 30 years later I've spent 10 years by myself, and I'm very committed to the idea that no matter what my relationships are, even in my daily life, even with my students, even with my colleagues, I am so forthright, both about race and gender, that people get worn out quick. They just feel like, don't you ever give it a break? I say, no, you can't give it a break, because if you give it a break, you get, as you say, confused, and then things get complicated, and I'm trying to avoid that.
Again, our guest on today's program, Changeseeker, here at the Context of White Supremacy. Before I go to the phone lines, I'm going to see if Justice has some more questions. But I did want to point that out. I want listeners to really think about this, because I really think for this problem to change, I don't see a lot of evidence, and I'll ask, a little later in the program, I'll ask your perspective, Changeseeker. But I have concluded that I haven't seen any evidence that white people are interested in discontinuing the practice of racism, white supremacy. The handful of white people like yourself who allege to be against racism, white supremacy, I feel that they are not statistically significant. The John Browns, it's not enough of you all, and you all do not seem to be the most powerful white people, the most powerful white people. I mean, just telling the truth,
I hear you.
The most powerful white people do not seem to be at all interested in blogging about why they're not surprised about racism and white supremacy. So it just, in my view, I really think that non-white people are going to have to, they're going to have to be the ones to fix this problem, even though we did not create it, as you said, it is white people's problems. Non-white people are going to have to solve this problem if it's going to get solved, I've concluded. And I think a big part of that is just completely revamping our perception, thought, and conduct as it relates to white people. And I think a big part of that is really thinking, what does it mean to be in a sexual relationship with a white person who is invariably a racist? That's what white means. What does it mean to have a child with a racist? Really thinking about that and coming to some conclusions. But Justice, if you have some questions, go right ahead.
Have you explained to your children that you are a racist?
I don't explain it to them any differently than I explained it to you a little while ago, because, well, for one thing, I had 2 children, and only one of them was biracial. My first child, who was born with to a white father, and I died in his early 20s. And he was a committed anti-racist. I almost think, a lot of his life decisions were made because he was so strongly committed to anti-racism, but in any case, he's dead. My remaining child is 28, and she is certainly an adult who has developed her own perspectives, and as you noticed in the thing she wrote when she was only 7, I had I had made it possible for her to understand very clearly what's going on in the world. She once said to me when she was about 4, she said, "You're one of the good white people, Mom." And I think possibly that was similar to what Gus just said, where he said there is a few people who are trying to make a difference, who have been raised as white people, but it's not enough. And the decision making is being done by people who don't want it to change. So that makes it pretty much of an ongoing fight. But I've been real honest with her. I've been real honest with her, and she seems to be doing all right. So I guess we've done the best we could.
Does your non-white daughter have sex with white people?
I couldn't begin to talk about what my non-white daughter does sexually. That's her area. You'd have to have her on the show to talk to her about that.
That's all for now.
I'm going to go to the phone lines because some folks have called in and they might have questions. Might be interesting to have you and your daughter on the program at some point. That I think would be very interesting. Let's see. 864. If you have a question for Changeseeker, your line is open.
Good afternoon to both of you. This show has been, very refreshing and very interesting to listen to, because your dialogue has raised so many different good points that it's hard to pick out one to comment upon. But one of the ones that I'm interested in making a brief comment upon, which you both have talked about, is the issue of denial. And I find it interesting that anyone could be in denial these days. When you look at, for example, the Tea Party movement, where people are showing up, despite what we feel about Barack Obama, people are comfortable showing up with signs where he has a bone in his nose or Hitler mustache, and then you have instances where people like civil rights heroes like John Lewis are spat upon by people who, well, quote unquote, have political differences with him. And also this unconstitutional law that's being disputed in Arizona. But here's the thing. Barack Obama did every single thing that conservative white men have preached to minorities for a long time. Okay, just work hard, as if we're in our position because we haven't worked. We built the country. That's hard work. But just work hard, study hard, and you will blah, 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 blah. We've all heard it. Now, Barack Obama's done all of that. He became a Harvard scholar. He was editor of the Harvard Law Review. Look, he's a black guy and he became president. Good grief. How much of a scholar and intelligent person do you have to be in order to do something like that? Very intelligent. But despite all of that, this man is so hated. All of the death threats and the racist emails that have been intercepted between different politicians, even I can't remember his name now, referring to him as he's being electable because he doesn't use Negro dialect. I can't remember what his name is now. But Another quick reflection on this is the fact that
hang on 1 second, sir.
Sure.
I'm not really doing comments. If you have questions, because a lot of people called in, if you have a question you would like to ask, that's great. Or if you would like her to respond to any of the comments that you've made thus far, that would be cool. But if you don't have a question, I'll let her respond to what you said. Do you have a question, or did you just have more comments?
Okay. One quick question. I could do either one, but I'll ask a quick question.
Okay.
In this economy where black men with college degrees are doing twice as bad as white men with or without college degrees, wouldn't you say this is even more evidence that people should pay attention to and not pretend it's just some sort of an anomaly due to whatever else, and further proves everything that both of you all have been talking about? And I will listen to your comments, and great show.
Thank you, sir.
All right, y'all take it easy. All right.
Mm-hmm.
Should I go ahead, Gus?
Please.
Okay. First of all, I'd like to speak to the Obama issue just briefly, just respond to his comment a little bit, because I know that a lot of people have varying degrees of satisfaction and dissatisfaction with what they've been able to see and out of this administration, just as people always do with new presidents. But I think that the panic that set in with some white people when Barack Obama was elected, and realistically, I mean, the man got a lot of white votes or he wouldn't have been elected, but some white people panicked when he was elected. And I think they panicked partly because when you are a white supremacist, when that is the default position and your perception of yourself is driven by the idea that you believe on a base level that people with fair skin are superior to people of color, when you have espoused that as your way of seeing yourself, then if a black man is president and you believe that African Americans or people of color are inferior to you, and yet he's president, then who are you? So you have lost your sense that you're superior. And that's what they're panicked about. That's why they're attacking, and I think they're dangerous. I think they're beyond dangerous. I think they are the first wave of a war, and I think they are. We should pay grave attention to these people. On his other comment about the economics of our situation, I am so horrified. I don't even know what kind of a word to use. When African American men are nearly 4 times more likely to be unemployed at every educational level than white men, and when a European American man, a white man with a felony conviction for cocaine dealing, will be hired over a black man with no such conviction. And we've done research like this that demonstrates this stuff. And in 2001, when 1 out of 3 African American boy babies when they outlined the statistics that 1 out of 3 African American boy babies born in 2001 were probably going to go to prison. And then the Bureau of Labor Statistics says, just brought out their report a few weeks ago, that while overall U.S. unemployment is 10%, African American unemployment is 16%. And if you include the invisible unemployed, those who are part-time, working part-time, or have quit actively working because they can't get a job, that means that 28% of African Americans are unemployed. And this is not because they're not trying to be employed. 16 to 19-year-old men, boys, are 74% of them, by estimate, are unemployed. this is like a pipeline straight into prison. They know the powers that be, what I call the decision makers. When you were talking about the bulk of the white people a while ago, the decision makers, those who are in positions of power, those who have the ability to define, the power to define what our lives are going to look like, no matter who we are, those folks, they know exactly what's going on and how it's playing out. And they don't have a problem with it. This is not an accident. This is not a, oh my gosh, I wonder how come this is happening. This is the way it's supposed to be, and this is the way it is. And we have to come against this as you say, people of color have to, well, I can't say what anybody has to do, but it's crucial for us all to understand, those of us who are paying attention, that this is not an accident. It's an okie doke. It's intentional. And it's being very effectively administered, as a matter of fact, to do exactly what it's supposed to do. In this state where I am, I just discovered a week ago that 74% of the men in the major state prison here are doing life without parole.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Intentional. And I think the blog title, Why Am I Not Surprised? We should not be surprised. That's what white supremacy means. That is what white supremacy intends, especially for black people. I think we started the week talking about Shawshank Redemption. There you go. That's what you're supposed to be. They make movies about that. Shawshank Redemption and Green Mile, as a matter of fact. That's what we started the week at. This is intended if you are a non-white person, especially a black person. Somebody called in at 111. They have a question.
Can I be heard?
Yes, loud and clear.
Thanks for taking my call, Gus. This is for your guest. I heard a lot of constructive information, but I have a question about the solution. And what do you think white people need to do, since you are a white person, in the system of racism, white supremacy, to end this racism and replace it with justice, in your experience on this planet?
I think, first of all, well, I once had a white student raise their hand in class and say, well, what is it black people want us to do? And I was like, well, good grief, how am I supposed to give you a simple answer to that question and speak for all black people and I look like I do? But I can say this. I think if white people will begin to understand that there's a need for them to respect other people. There's a need for white people to learn how to respect other people. They don't even respect themselves. See, white people don't respect them. If you respect yourself, you respect other people. So in order to be able to respect somebody else, you have to respect yourself. But if you are basing your feelings about yourself on the mistaken notion that you are somehow superior to somebody else, then clearly you're not looking at yourself from a healthy, mentally healthy standpoint, and so you don't respect yourself. But that concept of respect, I think, would demand a lot of things. For one thing, it would demand justice for everybody. I think working for justice, when I tell my students that if one group in this country can have all their rights removed, then any group in this country can have all its rights removed. It's kind of the the way somebody, I don't remember exactly who it was, said that if there, injustice for any of us is a lack of justice for all of us. That we can't be. I think a lot about prison. I was involved with the prison movement for a long time, and I'm still involved with it to some extent. And if we're going to understand how the criminal justice system is used to maintain the system the way it is, not just in terms of white supremacy, but in terms of injustice in general to anyone who challenges those who have the power to define, then we have to understand that we have to come against what is being done to anybody that's being railroaded. Those 74% of those men doing life without parole, I have to come against that. Whatever I can do as an individual, I have to do. It is necessary for me to do that, not just to free them, but to free myself. I'm not trying to save black people. I'm trying to save myself. We are all in this mess, and we all, it's going to be necessary. I agree with you, Gus, that African Americans are going to have to show us how to get out of this soup, because they have somehow survived this horrendous attack over a 400 or 500 year period and managed to do it without becoming completely reduced by it. As Maya Angelou says, we rise, we rise, we rise, and that can make it possible for us to bond together and to save this situation in some way. But I don't know what the result is going to look like. I don't know what the end result is going to look like, and I don't know what the process of getting there is going to be like. It's not going to be simple, but we have to begin with the idea that it is imperative for white people to admit what's going on, to be honest about it, to see it in themselves, to root it out of themselves, to work daily to come against it, and then to act, to bring about justice to the extent that they can do that in whatever way that is. A little tiny story, little tiny anecdote. I ran up to get some photographs one day at a store, and there was an African-American man already standing there. And as soon as I ran up to the counter, this white woman came from somewhere, and she walked up and she said to me, "Can I help you?" And I said, I was in a real horrified hurry, but I said, well, he was here first. I wasn't even paying any attention. I just said, he was here first. And she said, well, I'm sure it would only take me a minute to take care of you. And I stopped, and I looked at her, and I said, no, you didn't understand what I said. He was here first. And she said, oh, well, okay, can I help you? And then she started talking to him. Now, that was a tiny little thing that really meant very little in the grand scope of things. It didn't upheave white supremacy. But for a split second, this guy and I looked at each other. That was it, and then he got his pictures or whatever and left. But for a split second, we understood something that I think needs to happen on a grander scale. I don't know if it's possible, but it needs to happen.
Let's see. Caller, last four digits, 9601, 9601. If you have a question for Changeseeker, your line is open.
Greetings, Gus and Justice and the speaker as well. I just have a question. You said that you understood that being white meant that you were a racist. So what are you going to do to, would you suggest to other non-whites not to have any sexual activity or relationship because it further confuses them in understanding how white supremacy works? Would you tell your daughter that?
I think that, as I said, in a perfect world, things would be quite different. In a not perfect world, I wouldn't begin to try to tell people what to do with their bodies. Now, again, you have to understand that I've spent the last 2 years besides talking about race and blogging about race, I've been studying and learning about gender power differentials. And the gender power differentials are humongous as well. And if I'm going to suggest that people only have sex with people that look like them, then I would be also suggesting that women only have sex with women and men only have sex with men, and that gets real tricky for a lot of folks. I couldn't tell an individual what would be best for them. I can say in general, however, that to cross the color line or, well, just let's keep it simple, to cross the color line without understanding all of the political ramifications of that is to kid yourself about what's really going on. I do think it's a political act, and I do think because of that, it can get creepy at best. It is not necessarily a good thing for people to do, and so I couldn't say to someone, you can't do it, you shouldn't do it. I can say, you need to consider very heavily.
I said, would you suggest, in order to minimize confusion? And you didn't answer my question up to now. It seems like you're going into other discussions such as gender, which I'm not referring to. I'm just saying in the system of white supremacy, you said that you acknowledge that you're a racist. With that in mind, would you suggest to other people, even other non-white men that come to you, to say that, no, I will not have sex with you because it's not correct in the system of white supremacy?
I don't speak in terms of correct and incorrect. I really don't. Humans are much more kaleidoscopic than that. However, when
you're being confusing right now, I'm just asking you a yes or no question, but you're furthering.
It's not a yes or no question. It's not a yes. It's not a question. Let me put it this way: it's a yes or no question. It can't be answered with a yes or no answer. It's similar to when you said that I said I was a racist. I said that they embedded me in my training with the virus of racism. I didn't say I'm a racist because I'm working very hard not to manifest that. That's not something you can ignore. That's very real. Similarly, who people have sex with, and that's what we're really talking about. We're not talking just about relationships. We're talking about who people have sex with is, again, just as it is for my daughter, it's really not my business. Now, it's a legitimate dialogue. It's a legitimate discussion, and I think it should be had. I think African Americans could discuss this, and white people could discuss this and try to come to some space, but to make a blanket statement that all black people should only have sex with black people and all white people should only have sex with white people. Oh, I'm sorry.
You're not understanding.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say that particular thing. If you're saying, let me try this then. You're saying, would I suggest they not do it? Is that better? Is that more right?
Correct.
Yeah. Even at that, as far as I would go is to say it's something we really, really, really need to deeply consider before we consider it. Let's put it that way. Because you're right. It brings in a lot of stuff. And most people aren't willing to do that. Most people aren't willing to think about all the things that come with it. I don't know. It's not easy. It's not easy to say, well, let's just take the easier, softer route. I don't think there is one. I'm sorry. I do know that I'm sort of creating complications, but it's a complicated issue. It really is. To me.
Did you have another question, Tired, or?
That's all. Thank you.
Groovy. Thank you for calling in. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Mr. Nero, I believe. Mr. Nero, if you're there, if you have a question, your line is open.
Greetings, Gus and Jessica.
Greetings, sir.
Greetings.
Hello, ma'am. I suspect you may be practicing racism on this call. But let me ask you a question. How old would you say your daughter was, your non-white daughter, when she realized that she was not white?
I discussed this in the in a post on my blog in a portion of the book. Actually, there was an incident when she was about maybe 4, maybe somewhere in there. Certainly, she had been surrounded by African Americans and Africans, and she had a lot of. She had an African map on her wall, and she knew people from a bunch of different countries and stuff, and so she'd been exposed. But a little white boy about her age said to her, or demanded to know of her in a grocery store one day, "Are you black or are you white?" And she was dumbfounded, and I think partly because he was just so aggressive, and she wasn't, he just came out of left field. She didn't know who he was. I didn't know who he was. And he did this thing. So we had this whole dialogue about that after that, and it's all on the post, but it discusses how I talked to her about the history, and one commentator on the blog said, "Wow, that was a big dose to give a little kid." And I felt like that was necessary at the time. So that's what I did. And that's when she wound up telling me, "You're one of the good white people, Mom." And she was 4 at the time. But she had a sense of race at that time. I'm clear, because then subsequently she wrote what she did, that Gus started the broadcast by reading. I'm curious, what did you mean by "you suspect I'm practicing racism in this show"? I mean, am I allowed to ask?
One example would be I just feel it's disingenuous to interject sex or gender as another form of oppression during a call in regards to racism. So, I mean, that was just one thing that I noticed. Of course, women are mistreated, and it is something that's incorrect, but the name of this show is The Context of White Supremacy, and that is the topic that is generally discussed on this show. So anytime a guest comes on and begins to speak on other forms of oppression, I feel that they are practicing racism and white supremacy, and I also feel that it's even disingenuous, to that particular cause to try to mix it in. If it's as serious as people claim that it is, it should have its own platform.
Thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Mr. Nero, did you have another question, or?
Not right now.
Okay. Justice, did you have some questions you would like to ask Changeseeker?
Not at this moment, thank you.
Okay. I guess I'll go back to your daughter, because you blog about Morgan quite a bit, and she's not white. You said that she commented, she made that incredible analysis at 7, where she seemed to have a pretty accurate understanding, I think, of what's going on the planet with regards to racism, white supremacy. You also said that she said that you're one of the good white people, Mom. What exactly?
At 4.
At 4. Okay.
I was at earlier that was an earlier conversation when she was called out in the grocery store at the age of 4 and demanded to declare her race,
okay.
which came 3 years before she wrote that other thing. So, it was right after she began to understand there was such a thing as white and black, which was unfortunate that it had to, she had to begin dealing with that in that way at that moment, but I didn't see a way around it once they started coming to her.
I see. Because I don't. That's terminology I don't use. Good white person. But if you could explain.
Sure.
Okay. Do you know what a good white person is, or what a good white person would do that nobody else does?
I'm thinking. I tend to agree with you. You said something earlier in the program about the term white, and I don't remember exactly how you worded it, but it had to do with the idea that white is a category. I think it's in your definition of white supremacy, and it was really well put about how white is a category. It's a socially constructed category that was drafted for the express purpose of brutalizing people who were deemed to be not white. I think that's a really important idea, that these were created ideas, and in fact that's why I call race the socially constructed political notion of race. It wasn't based on biology. It wasn't based on law. It wasn't based on religion. But all of those things were used to legitimate and rationalize the creation of these categories. And in fact, the category of white was actually drafted after the category of black was, in response to, well, we got to call these other workers something. What are we going to call them? If we're going to call these people, this whole block of people, if we're going to call them black, what are we going to call these people over here to differentiate these other workers? And they agreed they would use the term white. Before that, that was approximately the 1700s. There really wasn't a concept of white before that. So the idea of white being a category means that, as such, I don't think it has a good side. It's a political category. It's a category that is based on the idea of supremacy. Therefore, how could there be a good white person? Now, to a little girl who has just heard the story of race from her mother, who has fair skin, similar to the fair skin of the child who backed her up and yelled, "Are you black or are you white?" at her over and over a couple of hours before that. She was trying to make sense of it. I used to use the term European American to differentiate somebody who has fair skin but is not operating instantaneously at that moment as in some political way, like a white way. I used white as a political name. An ugly name. But it was recently pointed out to me that black and white were, since they are concoctions, since they were created as ideas, you can't get around using them. So I've reverted to using black and white again to mean categories that we have created for a purpose of putting a power differential between two groups. Now, having said that, a person with fair skin who is trying to dismantle that power differential would be a person, I would say, is at least making an attempt to introduce justice to a situation that is very, very sick, very unjust. Now, if you want to call that good, or you want to call that healthy, or you want to call that appropriate, or you want to call that just decent, if you want to, whatever adjectives we could put on it, I would say that a white person who is aggressively addressing the power differential that has been embedded in this society, and as you point out, the world arena that has to do with race, that person would be doing some good things or some just things. Whether I would call them a good white person as opposed to somebody else being a good Latino person or a good black person, those are tricky terms. Good is relative, in other words, I think. I tend to use words that are more like healthy or, that speak very specifically to an idea, to righting wrong, if you will, or something like that, rather than to just use a word that might mean something very different to different people.
Okay. Your daughter used the term good white people. You used the term white ally. What specifically does a white ally do that no one else does? And I guess I would keep in mind if white people, all white people, are conditioned to practice racism, then we're saying, what would a racist ally do that no one else does?
I don't know if you're using the term racist as an adjective there in a way that I think belies the point that I made at the first of the show. In other words, while a person is operating, okay, let me try this. Maybe this will make sense. I have light skin. I know that when I walk into a store, I'm approached and treated as if I was a, quote, white person, unquote, because I have light skin. How I respond to that treatment, how I respond to that assumption is what makes the difference between being an ally and just being happy to operate as a racist. If I have a couple of different blog posts on my blog about being an ally, and the reason that I put them in a place on the blog so that people can refer to them if they come there right away is because otherwise I get a lot of questions about what can I do, and I just route them there because it's a long process. The first thing you have to do is work on yourself. The first thing you have to do is get real with yourself. The first thing you have to do is become aware, quit pretending to be asleep, and become really aware of what's going on. And quit pretending that you're not in any way benefiting from it, and then do something about that. It's not enough to just say what you're going to do. It's not enough to just feel warm and fuzzy thoughts. It's not enough to just say, well, we ought to all stand in a circle and hold hands and sing Kumbaya. That's not enough. For example, when I finished my my book, Reduced to Equality, I was trying to decide exactly. Well, no, I wasn't finished with it yet. I was finishing it. I was coming to the end of it. And I had come to grips with learning a lot of things about my mother's family from 150 years ago that were really pretty startling to me. And I was looking originally to find out, did I have African Americans in my family, which of course I do. But as I did that, I learned some other things, and I was really pretty surprised. And my daughter was just, she said, well, you shouldn't be surprised. And I said, well, I guess maybe I shouldn't. But it threw me into thinking about how we function based on the past, not only as individuals, but as a society. And I said to her, what do you think of this book being something like an apology for issues in the past? And she said, well, I'll tell you one thing. No amount of BS white liberal guilt will ever do anything for anybody. And I thought about that for a couple of days, and I realized that I needed to do something. So I wrote right into the book as I was finishing it that half of the proceeds of the book would go to a scholarship fund for a particular group of people, African American people. And that felt appropriate because what I was doing was modeling doing something and not just talking about an issue. It's not abstract. People's lives are constantly being affected by this. Not just they have been affected, but we are all being constantly affected by this. And a white ally would be a person who was attempting in a bold way to make a change in this, in doing, not just in talking about or not just in thinking about. But part of what you have to do is address this crap in yourself. That's what I said when I said I was embedded with racism. I was embedded with it because of my skin tone. How I address that and attack that on a daily basis. And I'm not talking about once in a while or when I'm on a radio show or when I'm in front of a classroom or when I'm in public. I'm talking about when I'm by myself in my head, I am vigilantly looking for, rooting out, attacking, thinking about, not letting myself off the hook. You know, I work at that. And I think that's what has to happen. And again, just like in making relationships or anything else, that's a lifetime process. And it isn't easy, but it is possible. And I ask in the book in a number of places, if this white supremacist system is so locked in and there's no way to not just be part of it, if there's no way to avoid this being the way everything has to be, because a lot of people say, well, it's always been like this and it's always going to be this way. I've heard many people of color say that, for example, and I always say, it's not always been this way, and nothing ever will always be any particular way. Social change is continual. Whether we see it or not is how well we can see. Has nothing to do with whether or not it's going on.
Can I hop in really quick there?
Sure.
Thank you. Because I was asking about white ally
right.
specifically. One constructive tidbit that I did get from the White Privilege Conference, Zach Casey, he was actually on the program about 2 weeks ago, admitted racist. He shared two, and they're joined. They're joined, and they make perfect sense together. The first was, and he shared this on the program. He said that he has a concept called the impossibility of positive white identity, and to boil it down, it just means that it's impossible to have a good white person, a white person that's not racist. As long as the system of white supremacy exists, it's not possible. If you're white, you're going to be racist. You're going to be white supremacist. We're swimming in racism, white supremacy. It is the air you breathe. It's just not possible. And the more that we went through the conference, he said he saw more examples, seeing white people who were alleging to be, working against racism. The more he saw that, the more he said, yeah, it's just not possible. The good white person thing is just not possible. And he tied that to the term white ally. And he said, I don't like that term. And I said, why? And this is, again, white person, admitted racist, white supremacist. And he said, ally is a war metaphor. You have allies in war that supply you with weapons, munitions, soldiers. An ally will die for you in battle. That's what an ally is. I do not see these white people who say that they are so-called white allies. And you said when I used racist ally that I was using racist as an adjective. I think white would be an adjective in that sentence as well, white ally. So it still wouldn't change anything. But he said I don't see these white people, these so-called white allies, I do not see them conducting themselves like an ally would in war. And racism, white supremacy is war against non-white people. The admitted racist white supremacist known as Tim Wise, when he was on the program, he agreed racism, white supremacy is terrorism worldwide against non-white people. And a white person could do all of those things that you listed. They could make a scholarship for non-white people. They could point out, hey, I think you just made a racist comment, or this black person or this non-white person was ahead of me in line. They should be served first. They could do all of those things and still practice racism, which I suspect you do. You said on your blog that white people frequently end up with their foot in their mouth trying to do this work. It's a lifelong process. You still have to do that work every day. You could do all that and still practice. In fact, I think it would be most accurate to say white people do all of those things and still practice racism. I think, just going back to what I said, I think the evidence shows white people, there's no evidence that would suggest white people are going to stop practicing racism. Non-white people, I think, are going to have to solve this problem. And I think one of the things non-white people are going to have to do is to seriously reevaluate their perception of white people, and not thinking this is my white ally, they're good white people, this is one of the good white people, thinking white means racist white supremacist. And I think one thing so-called white allies could do would be very honest about that. Mr. Nero, he called in and he said he suspected that you were practicing racism on the call. I agree with that. I think, and I would point out the confusion, at least for me, it has been confusing to hear you talk about being a racist, because it has not been clear. When Justice asked, you gave the example and you didn't say you were a racist. In fact, after you finished with your response, she said, so you are not a racist. She thought by your response that you were saying you're not a racist, with the example of being suffering from diabetes. That's why I followed up with that, just making sure we could be clear. And when it came up on the call again, I felt that same ambiguity. I have not heard, just with clarity, with high definition clarity, I am a racist. I do this work. I have my blog. I'm writing my book, Reduced to Equality, but still, I have been trained to function as a racist, and I follow my programming. Even when I work to try not to do that, I still do it. That would be helpful, to really make sure that there is never a moment where a non-white person thinks, this white person is not racist, this is something that I don't need to be on my toes about, because we do. And I think when you use the term white ally and just anything that's going down that direction that is presenting what you said today when asked, are you a racist? Most non-white people are not going to think, I need to be on my toes. Even with Changeseeker, I need to understand, even she is a racist white supremacist. So I would have to agree with the caller, Mr. Nero. I think she has practiced racism on the program and shared constructive information, but far and away it needs to be much clearer. Not white allies, not good white person. I, too, even Changeseeker, yes, I am a racist white supremacist. That's why this system is so dominant, so powerful. All white people are implicated and practicing the system of white supremacy.
Well, that's quite a space to come to, but I agree with you. I agree with Zach Casey, too, as a matter of fact. The breathing, white supremacy, the swimming in white supremacy, an ocean of white supremacy, I agree. We are, all of us, including me. And because we are doing that, the process of even trying to come against it is conducted in that ocean. No question. And when I say that I was infected with it and that I have to be vigilant against it, it's because it's in there. It's because I know it's in there. It's because I see it. It's because it comes up. I wouldn't have to deal with it if it wasn't in there. I wouldn't have to work at it so hard if it wasn't already in there. When you talk about ally, when Zach Casey talked about an ally being an assistance in war, I consider myself an ally. Now, if that's an ally that is also a white person because of the way I was raised and because of the way I look, then that's correct. That's true. If that's in that sense, then I'm a white racist. I am a white supremacist. And the most important thing I think you said that I would totally agree with is that people of color have to know that anybody that looks like me is carrying this disease, is carrying this reality. And even if they work at it very hard, and even if they are an ally in the sense of, I would load a black man's gun, even if they are that, they also carry this other stuff. And it's their job to get rid of it, and people of color can help them get rid of it by being as straightforward with them as you and Nero and some others have been, and Justice have been with me today. When we were creating this show, when we were putting this together, I told you that I looked at this as an opportunity to learn and grow, and I do. Because it's people of color, it's African American in particular people, who have brought me however far I have come, regardless of how imperfect I am in this ocean of white supremacy. It is people of color that have brought me as far as I have come. And so even though it's sometimes unsettling, it's what has to be done if I'm going to continue to learn more than I already know in an attempt to be of use.
Wow. I have a request. I'm excited. I have a request. But I want to see if Justice has questions. Justice, do you have questions you would like to ask Changeseeker?
So at this moment, I'm just listening. Thank you.
No problem. No problem. The proof of the pudding is in the eating. My request, this will tell me a lot. This will tell me a lot about your sincerity in replacing white supremacy with justice as soon as possible. Your daughter seemed to have a very clear understanding of racism, white supremacy at 7. You said that was 20 years ago. She presumably is in her late 20s now. I would love to have you and your daughter on the program. If you are as committed to ending racism as soon as possible, it would help me a lot to be able to understand, or just to observe, what understanding your daughter has of racism, white supremacy. That would clue me into a lot, because if you're really dedicated, the non-white person that you've had the most contact with by far, I would have to assume would have to be your daughter. If she, just being able to see what her level of understanding of racism, white supremacy is, that would let me know a lot. Do you think that's possible? We could have the two of you on a program together?
I would have no idea. She's grown. I would have to ask her. That's the best I could do, because certainly, I mean, it's not like she's a kid that I could bring on the show because I'm in a manipulative or age control of her. We don't live in the same place, and I would have to ask her. That's the best I can do.
Okay. Would you be willing to ask her?
Sure.
Okay. If, as a non-white person, victim of racism, white supremacy, if my parent ever came to me and said, I was on a program about racism, they wanted you to come and talk just to see, if I passed on the knowledge that I have to you, I would do it. Particularly if it was just a phone call, I would do it. So even if she wasn't willing to do the program, that would be interesting too. That would be very interesting. So you said you're willing to ask her to see if she would be willing to speak with us?
Sure.
Okay. We'll try and see if we can get that to happen as soon as possible, because I think that would be fascinating, and I think a lot of listeners, they would enjoy hearing that. That would let me know a lot to see what her level of understanding is of racism, white supremacy, because it seemed like at 7 she was pretty clear. It seemed like she was pretty solid about what's going on here. I guess I'll double check really quick to make sure we don't have any other calls, and I'll plug the blog again. Please check the blog. It is whyamiNotSurprised.blogspot.com. You can read the posts and everything. You can read excerpts from the book as well, Reduced to Equality. I'll just open the phone line up. If you called in, if you have a question, we have about 4 minutes left. If you have a question for Changeseeker, go right ahead.
Yes. Gus, can I be heard?
Yes. You have a quick question, go right ahead.
Yes. She said earlier that racism, white supremacy is a disease for white people. And it seems like after listening to this program, they enjoy their disease, so why would they ever want to get rid of it? For your caller.
Oh, I was thinking, well, I don't know if they enjoy it or not. I think that most of the time, mental health, lack of mental health, insanity, if you will, creates a situation where I don't think people are enjoying it. It's not fun to be like they are, but they don't know any different. Now, why would they want to change? Because they have to do that to survive. I used to say to people, I haven't been saying it a lot lately because I've been talking in some other things, but I used to say, the issue is, do you want to be on top or do you want to survive? That's the question. And it's possible that that's still the question. They need to understand that it's not about whether they like it or not. This has to be over now. That's just my beat on it.
Any of the other callers? Yes, I can hear you.
I just have a question. If insanity is defined as doing the same thing but expecting a different result, it seems like, by what I've observed, white people know what they want the end result to be. And if a person was insane, would they have a clear idea of how to maintain white supremacy?
I think that insanity is not going for the same thing and not getting it. I think that I think it's knowing exactly what you're going to wind up with and going for it over and over, even though it's not in your best interest. White supremacy is not in the best interest of the human race, and that's the point. If white people are not part of the human race, If white people are not part of the human race, then we're in dire trouble. They have to be relieved of their power.
I think you said earlier that that's just how they've learned to participate or to function. But how do they know what they're doing, and at the same time they are oblivious or are just conditioned to act the way that they do? It seems it doesn't make sense to you?
I understand. I think I do. They are conditioned, but they also have learned to see it as being a good way to be, and it isn't. It isn't a good way to be, and that's the bottom line.
That's all, Gus. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Gus, I had a follow-up. Hello?
I'm still here.
Yeah. Go right ahead, sir.
Can I be? Okay. When you said you don't think they like the disease, but after listening to the show, it seems like they benefit from it. Why would they like receiving a white privilege mistreating people. It seems like they like it. I mean, I think most white people, or probably 99% of them, like the privilege that they have every day, and that is mistreating people to receive that privilege. Am I correct?
I agree. I think that most white people do like the privileges, and they like the sense that they're superior. They like that too.
So in essence, they like the mental disease. They like the whatever you want to use to replace it, but they just like practicing racism, white supremacy. If they like the privilege, that means they like practicing racism, white supremacy. And it's kind of hard to get someone to change if they like doing what they're doing, especially if they feel like it's going to preserve them.
Well, one thing, from my perspective, one thing is for sure. If I'm in a boat and somebody's drilling a hole in the bottom of the boat that I'm in, I don't care whether they like it or they understand it or they bought the seat that they're drilling it under. If they're going to drill a hole in the bottom of the boat that I'm sitting in, I'm going to stop them. If I'm going to do whatever I can, let's put it that way, to stop them, right up to and including throwing them right out of the boat.
Amen.
I don't have a problem with that.
Right on. Changeseeker, you said you were willing to ask your daughter if she'd be willing to come on a program with you together and chat about racism, white supremacy. Yes?
Yes.
Okie dokie. Excuse me. You can shoot me an email, I guess, as soon as possible. As soon as possible, would you be able to shoot me an email back and let me know if she'd be willing to come hang out with us?
I will.
Outstanding. I'm looking forward to that. That would be great if we can pull that off. If there's anything you'd like to say before we wrap up the program, I'll give you the final word.
Thank you. I appreciate the opportunity to be on here. I like talking to you and to your listeners, and I hope that we've been able to do something good and positive and productive with this time. I feel that I've learned some things, and it will affect me. You'll see the reflection on the blog. So, thank you.
Thank you. I hope there's a part 2 to this with Morgan. That would be outstanding, I think, and very informative for myself and the listeners. I will look out for the blog post. I hope listeners will as well. Again, it is Why Am I Not Surprised.blogspot.com. That is Changeseeker's blogspot, and you can look for portions of the book Reduced to Equality, My Odyssey to Renounce Racial Privilege and Find Myself. Very much enjoyed the program. Think I learned quite a bit, and I will be looking forward to see if Morgan will be willing to come hang out with us. Have a fantastic weekend. Hope you are productive, and we'll be checking the blog to see if we get any feedback from your experience on the cows.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Look forward to hearing from you again.
Okay. Bye-bye, guys.
Context of white supremacy. Gus T Renegade and Justice. We're going to take a quick commercial, and we will be right back. Hang tight.
Is racism hurting you? On issues of race, are you unable to speak, think, and act with clarity and confidence? Are you tired of laughing when nothing is funny, smiling when you are not happy, agreeing when you really disagree? At counterracism.com, you can learn specific strategies and techniques to counter the behaviors of the people who practice racism in all areas of activity, using words correctly, following counter-racist logic, even counter-racist science projects designed to reveal what racism is, how it works, and how to counter it. The The open source code writing format allows you to pick and choose from a variety of counter-racist suggestions so you can produce the code that works for you. Stop by counterracism.com today and help replace racism with justice.
That's counter-racism.com.
This is Uncle Ruckus, no relation to him. After much thinking in my mind, I realized that Tiger Woods is not responsible for his latest act. No, he is not. Look here, to be allowed to lay with one white woman is certainly a gift from God up above. But to be blessed with laying with two or more white women, Lord, that is beyond all human comprehension. His damn child nigger brain must have exploded inside his skull. Anyway, this here is Uncle Ruckus, sounding off and signing off.
Context of White Supremacy, Gus T Renegade, and Justice. Very interesting program. I'm very interested in having Morgan on with Changeseeker. Morgan is her non-white daughter's name. If that program happens, that'll be all I need to know about Changeseeker. If her daughter does not understand why she should perhaps not be having sexual intercourse with white people, does not understand all white people are racist, just whatever her daughter understands about racism, white supremacy, that'll tell me all I need to know about Changeseeker, and that will be very informative about the sex thing with white people, white people's commitment to ending racism, white supremacy. I mean, that'll tell me a lot. I hope that happens. That will tell me a lot, much more than anything that's on her blog. Let me talk to your child. We'll let you know if we can pull that off. Justice, what did you think of our guest today?
I think she could have just answered yes or no on the question that I asked, are you a racist?
Mm-hmm.
I think she did the same thing, remember when Timothy Wise was on the show? And I asked him, are you a racist? And he was like, he didn't answer the question at first, and so that was what Changeseeker did too. And are you a racist is just a yes or no. Even I can answer that. I'm not a racist.
Yeah. That happened repeatedly. I think when Tired was speaking with her, I think she brought that up again, and it just seemed like she was being confusing. I suspect purposely that might not be the case, but I do suspect that. And just not, yes, I'm a racist. I felt like it was not definitive. I remember when she finished talking, because I was thinking the same thing. This sounds like Timothy on here talking about human psychology and the brain and all that other stuff. When she used the example of, having diabetes, I was just thinking, they do say that people who have diabetes, you call them a diabetic. I mean, it's real simple. If racism is a disease, then you're a racist. I mean, yeah, I am a victim of racism, white supremacy. I have been very much retarded as a black victim of white supremacy, so I could be incorrect, but I don't know. That seems like it should have been much more simple than she made it. So. Yeah. Did you have any other thoughts on what she shared on the program?
Nope.
Gotcha. Any of the folks that called in before we wrap up, did you want to get a last thought in about what you heard on the program?
Hello, Gus. This is Mr. Nero. Can you hear me? Can I be heard?
Yes, sir. Loud and clear.
Oh, okay. No, I just get a chuckle every time Justice lays it across their ass. I mean, Justice is something else, I tell you. Ooh. When you say Justice, don't play with me. Yes or no? That may have been the most constructive aspect of the show. Don't play with me. Yes or no?
Yeah. Just make it simple for us. Avoid the confusion. Make it simple for us. Definitions, and I agree with what she said, about I don't want to be flippant about this. I don't want to just play around and say yes or no and not really have any meaning behind that. But I feel the easy way to do it is just to explain what that means. Yes, I am a racist. This is what that means, and this is why. That's all. Just give an explanation. Or if it's no problem. No, I'm not a racist. This is what a racist is. This is what a racist does, and this is why I do not qualify. Real easy, straight, simple. I think that it doesn't have to be that confusing. It doesn't have to be that confusing at all. And I suspect since that trend has come up on the program of Timothy and the gang talking for, 15, 20 minutes, human psychology and all this other stuff, and not just a yes or no and an explanation, shows me a lot about the good white people, alleged anti-racists.
Oh. Try to ask me a question. Can I just busy?
Tired, are you speaking with us or are you talking to
I'm
someone
sorry.
else?
I'm sorry about that. I was speaking with someone else, but I would have to agree with you that she was confusing me. Like, just I asked her a simple question, and she was just talking a lot, gender and all that. That's what they do best, I guess. But I would have to agree with you.
Conflation, that is Dr. Ali's term for that, conflation, when white people, racists, suspected racists, when they bring in so-called gender oppression, and women are mistreated, don't get me wrong, women are mistreated, but they'll bring that in, they'll bring in homophobia, they'll bring in disabilities, anything else, just to dilute the conversation, conflation. Yeah, she did that as well. She did that quite a bit when you asked her question, Tired.
Yes, she was not making sense to me, especially on the insanity tip as well. Just, yeah.
Yeah.
Hello?
Yes, sir.
Yes, I was, when I was listening to her, I think she was prepared in the beginning, but then I don't think she was used to people actually questioning her racism, and then that's when she started to, I think that usually happens on the show, when someone is not prepared to answer questions, they talk about other things to divert from answering the questions, and I think that's kind of the norm now when we're talking to racists on your show.
Solid observation, sir. Solid observation. Yeah, I think I have heard other folks say something very similar, that I think that was, I don't think he said it on the program, but when I was speaking with Zach Casey, admitted racist, white supremacists, that was one of the key things he was picking out about Peggy McIntosh and Tim Wise, that they will point at these other white people. I think Jessie Daniels, when she was on the show, they'll point at Stormfront, or they'll point at the Tea Party people, or any other group of white people that they say are racist. But they're pointing the finger at them and not pointing it back and saying, hey, we're racist too. And he thought that that was a real slick tactic of refined racism, white supremacy, to point out a group of white people that are racist so that it looks like they're not racist. And I think Jessica Pettit said that on the program last year when she was here in July. I think she did say, I think she had that on her list of ways that white people practice racism who allege to be anti-racist. They'll pick out a group of white people to point the finger at and hang the racist tag on, and that deflects attention away from them. So excellent observation, sir. Excellent observation.
Great show, man.
Does anyone have any last minute thoughts? Anything? We can all go enjoy our Saturday here on the plantation of white supremacy.
Gus, I just want to add, in regards to this term, anti-racist, I think at best, and I may be incorrect and may need to be rescued from this statement, but I think at best, white people can only perhaps become a tool for non-white people to dismantle this system. And the best thing that they can do, in my opinion, is really to go to non-white people and ask, how may I serve you? And that, to me, just seems to be much more constructive if they use that approach as opposed to trying to prescribe their own ways of so-called practicing anti-racism. I would much, I'd like to at least see them try that as an approach, that they just come to non-white people and say, hey, how can I serve you? And see where that gets us.
I like that. We don't need to be pals. We don't need to be friends. Just help solve problems, improve my quality of life, end white supremacy. That's all. I think I guess I would throw this out for the term anti-racist or white ally. I think, and I just got this from preparing for this program and reading her blog, that it's a major act of racism, white supremacy, that racists, and she agreed, all white people are racists, that the racists, white supremacists, are defining what it means to be a white ally. I think the victims of white supremacy should be the ones who define what a white ally is and does. And the fact that it's the opposite way, I think, is just, it's an extraordinary facet of racism, white supremacy, refined racism, white supremacy. I think it's up to each individual victim. You should develop your own criterion for what white people need to be doing for you and or other non-white people, what they need to be doing for you to consider that white person a so-called good white person or a white ally or an anti-racist. You need to have your own criterion that's based on and reflects your understanding of racism, white supremacy. And the fact that that's not happening, that it's just coming from racists, I think is a major problem. It is a major aspect of racism, white supremacy. If those terms were coming from us and we had our own definitions for, this is what a white ally is supposed to do, well, it would be different. But I don't see that. And I think we should all be thinking about that. And substituting white for racist in a lot of those instances. I think that you get a much clearer understanding of things when you do that. Her statement on her blog where she talked about her non-white sex partner who she had Morgan with, that he couldn't get over her race. If you just substitute in couldn't get over her racism, very different sentence, and it reflects a whole nother level of racism, white supremacy, and what every non-white person should be thinking about with regards to why I and many other non-white people feel that there should not be sexual intercourse between white people and non-white people under the system of white supremacy. I think there were some other ones where you could substitute the word race for racism or white for racism, and it would give you a different understanding as well. But that would be my word again. Total overhaul in the way that non-white people think about white people. I think that is very much needed to replace white supremacy with justice, so that when you hear Changeseeker or Timothy or Peggy McIntosh, any of these other white people, regardless of what they say, regardless of how many blogs they have, regardless of how many books they publish, at the end of the day, they are still racist. We're still in a system of white supremacy, and you still need to understand this person is racist and most likely enjoys practicing racism. Sad reality. in the system of white supremacy. I did catch all the time she used fair today. I just didn't interject that, but she used fair quite a bit. And actually, she gave you both. She gave you the exact reason why you shouldn't be using that term, because she used fair to reference skin, and she used fair to reference correctness, justice, validity. She used it in both ways. That gives you exactly why I say that term, you should really, your ears should be perked if you're hearing people using that term, particularly white people, and that should be pointed out. That is it doesn't, for me, it does not get more explicit to the ingrained nature of racism, white supremacy, when you have people using a term to reference their white skin and to reference justice and correctness, beauty. I mean, that is just incredible. That is an incredible aspect of racism, white supremacy. I catch that. I think she said fair at least 3 times on the broadcast today, at least 3 times. So yes, I did catch it. I was paying attention. We will be back on Tuesday, twice on Tuesday. The bottom show is Andrew Manis. He is a professor at Macon College in Georgia. He is a white person. He wrote a piece called "When Will White People Get Over It?" And this is how tough white people are, right? A non-white person, non-Mightywick, had been talking to a family member, I believe his father, and speaking to him about racism, white supremacy. This is a big problem. We need to do something about this. You know, we're victims, yada, yada, yada. And, you know, typical non-white person, mildly receptive, but, you know, it's not shaking their world up too much. Good old Andrew Manis, good white person, he writes this piece, When Will White People Get Over It? And he's talking about racism and, you know, just saying it's white people, the problem is white people. And I was alive during the civil rights movement and seeing all these white people come out and get upset and throw bricks and rocks and you know, commit violence against non-white people who were trying to work against racism. And the Tea Party people, they look exactly like those white people 40 years ago who were out throwing bricks at black people. They look exactly like those people. The signs are a little different, but it looks exactly the same. This non-white person, he read that article and then said, oh my gosh, you were right. It is racism, which just, again, speaks to you in a system of white supremacy, you need that white magic. You need that white person to come and validate what you said. If you are a non-white person, you got to get a white person to co-sign on it before it'll really have some meaning for a victim of white supremacy, which is very, very sad, but to be expected. I'm not surprised about that either. That's why we have white people on the show. But Andrew Manis, he'll be here Tuesday afternoon. That will be at 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Central, 4 p.m. Pacific. But the early show, that will be Jacqueline Badalora. Jacqueline is the white woman from the White Privilege Conference that Gus would not hug. She will be on the show early Tuesday. It'll actually, I guess, depending on where you are, early Tuesday afternoon or early Tuesday morning. The show time is 1:30 p.m. Eastern, 12:30 p.m. Central, 10:30 a.m. Pacific. That's Tuesday. Jacqueline Badalora. Again, she was the creme de la creme at the White Privilege Conference. Incredible workshop. She basically explained why the history of white being racism, white supremacy, that is, if you are white, you are a racist white supremacist, and why the history of that. And she ties it to white genetic annihilation. I spoke to Dr. Welsing, and she thought that this white person could have stolen her work, which could be true. Could be true. Keep that in mind, I guess. Anybody, if you listen to this program, keep that in mind when you listen to the program with Jacqueline Badalora, that she could have pinched Dr. Welsing's work. This could be an act of racism where she's just taken another non-white person's work and advocating it as her own. Maybe, maybe not. I don't know. Keep that in mind as you listen to the program. But she does have a lot of detailed information about racism, white supremacy. And as I said, she pretty much she hammered it as to what it means to be a white person in a system of white supremacy. And she gives a very strong argument in terms of this is all being driven by white genetic annihilation. But that'll be, as I said, the early program on Tuesday. The time again, 1:30 p.m. Eastern, 12:30 p.m. Central, 10:30 a.m. Pacific. Jacqueline Badalora. It's not in the computer yet, so you won't see the link, but I'll do that today. So 2 for Tuesday. Justice, you want to shoot the email and get in any last words?
justice.asap@yahoo.com. Again, justice.asap@yahoo.com.
Groovy. Thank you, everybody, for participating in the program. I hope it was worthy of your time and energy. I hope you will be here to definitely be here, at least for the early program on Tuesday, because as I said, that was the best spot of the White Privilege Conference for me. Jacqueline Badalore, that workshop was fantastic, and if she can deliver at least 70% of what she shared in that workshop, will be a very constructive program. And as I said, it's pretty much hearing a white person give you Dr. Welsing's theory of white genetic annihilation, which I've never heard a white person say, yep, that's what I think it is. That's what, other than Michael Bradley, I guess. But yeah, it was very constructive. I learned a lot. I would highly encourage you to be here for the Tuesday program or check the archives if you can't listen live. But Jacqueline Badalore on Tuesday, early program, should be very, very constructive. I guess my final word would be, in addition to changing the way we perceive white people, I would say Timothy, he made a comment on his Facebook page where he said that the people that listen to this show aren't going to do anything anyway. I would take that as an insult. I would take that as an insult and an act of racism, white supremacy. I don't do this program for non-white people to just sit around and go, woe is me, things are so bad. I do this program because I believe that a major reason non-white people have not been more effective in countering racism, white supremacy, is because we are confused about how it works. I think if we develop a better understanding about what racism, white supremacy is and how it works, our brain will work better and we'll be able to come up with our own solutions and strategies for how to go about solving this problem. We just need a better understanding of the nature of the problem. So I hope people listening to this program, if it's doing what it's supposed to do, sharing accurate information about racism, white supremacy, that it will motivate, enable people, be a catalyst, so to speak, for people being able to do more to replace white supremacy with justice. So hopefully we will be able to prove Timothy wrong, that people do not just listen to the cows, that they go out and do other things, or even if they don't listen, that they're doing things. So, yeah, thank you all for listening to the program. I hope it's been constructive. Boondocks Season 3 tomorrow. I'm very excited. Check that out. Maybe we can chat about that down the road as well. We'll be back for 2 shows on Tuesday. Hopefully they'll both be very constructive. Again, support Cree7. Her blog, is cree7.wordpress.com, and Back of the Bus, nonwhitealliance.wordpress.com. We'll be back on Tuesday. Replace white supremacy with justice as soon as possible. Thank you. Cal signing out.